Tell us a bit about what you do, Fiona.
When it comes to self-awareness, which is fundamentally what it's about, is understanding ourselves and knowing ourselves. And that's for performance on the one hand, but also to keep ourselves emotionally resilient on the other.
Just get to go out with this screen for a drink.
I'll take this with me.
My name's Nicole. Welcome to the Big Chat. And today we are very excited to be talking to Fiona Murden. Hello, Fiona. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm super excited to be talking to you. I really can't say on a personal level and on a level of everyone in our community is going to know who you are after this, which is fabulous because the work that you do is phenomenal. Tell us a bit about what you do, Fiona, because you'll be much better at, obviously you're an occupational psychologist, but please expand on that for our audience here today.
Yeah, because most people haven't got a clue what that is, including other psychologists. But basically it's I've worked with leaders and prominent people like athletes and a few politicians and various people over the years and entrepreneurs, a lot of entrepreneurs and creatives actually. And it's trying to help them get the most out of themselves. So I started off in this field doing in-depth psychological profiling, where you go through a person's life over the course of 4 hours and then work out what their story is and what their strengths are, their passions are, how they're formed as a person, and then how they can use that to best effect in an organisation. But I always felt like I was working with the privileged people, and I wanted to sort of connect more broadly with people and give people these tools. So I wrote a couple of books and now doing some really, really exciting stuff with a charity to try and get things out a bit more broadly.
And what's the name of the charity that you're working with, so we all know?
Future First.
Future First. Wow, that sounds great.
Yeah.
That's it. You mentioned, you've worked with a lot of, obviously this is a business, trying to bring the business and local businesses, but also entrepreneurs and business owners and the community together. And it's really done that more than ever now because obviously you're a mother, I'm a mother, we work. I am similar to yourself. I listened to something that you said about you love being a mum, but you also need to keep busy. I can definitely relate to that. And I think a lot of people can. However, layering on the homeschooling that we're experiencing at the moment does add another dimension to it. But it's really fascinating for people that maybe haven't read your books, and we'll talk about your books a bit later. This profiling is phenomenal. From a point of view of getting into businesses and really drilling down on people's goals and what they need. But like you say, you've worked with some really big names. You've worked with Chief Editor of Mary Claire, haven't you? And Dr. Martens, CEO of Dr. Martens. Some big names.
No, there's a lot of people that I can't name as well, just because of the nature of the work. But it's
fine.
What's interesting is when it comes to self-awareness, which is fundamentally what it's about, is understanding ourselves, knowing ourselves. And that's for performance on the one hand, but also to keep ourselves emotionally resilient on the other. And it's something that never finishes. And, that could sound quite daunting, but actually it's really exciting because we're continually learning and exploring and finding out about things about ourselves and how we fit in the world around us.
And you're from Tunbridge Wells.
I am.
Not far from me, which is Tunbridge Wells is a small place. We've not crossed each other before. But how did you get into this? Obviously, you've worked with some big, and we'll talk about the work that you're doing now, because I think that's one of the greatest things to have come out of this pandemic is that connectivity. But it's kind of brought us all, it's united us all in one way or another. We're all experiencing something together on different platforms of that experience. So how did you get into being, what was sort of made you think, I'm going to get into this,
I'm such a geek because I was at Tunbridge Wells Girls Grammar School.
Were you?
I was, and I really enjoyed psychology. I can't remember, there was a newspaper article or something, and I wasn't really, makes it sound like I read the newspaper. I didn't really, but for some reason I read this article. And then I thought I wanted to do sort of traditional psychology, which is clinical psychologist. So I headed off down that path and then realised that I wasn't mentally robust enough to be able to do that. And that was partway through my undergraduate degree in psychology. And I thought, what am I going to do now? And so I had a job at uni, and I just thought I'll stay here for another year and I'll do a master's in business, because then I can go and work in business. So I then went to work in management consultancy, which everyone went, Fee, that's so not you. And I was like, oh, I'll show you. And it really wasn't me. But I mean, I had some amazing experiences, because I worked on the launch of PlayStation 2. I worked at London Stock Exchange. I did some really interesting stuff, but there was also a lot of it that was just like mind-numbing for me. It just didn't fit. And so I actually went off traveling around the world on my own for a year. Came back to that job and then quit and did my Master of Science in Occupational Psychology, because I'd spoken to so many people and found out that actually I could use what I'd learned for those few years I was consultant and reapply it together with the psychology. But to do that, I had to do another master's.
And this, I think, is fascinating, because I personally was a yoga teacher about, dare I say it, about 20 years ago. And I was a yoga teacher about 10 years. And then I did some training in meditation and worked on that. And it was at a time, a couple of decades ago, where it wasn't really in the business world. And I've always been a bit yin and yang. I've always been a bit, I love my yoga, I love my spirituality, but I also really love business, and I'm quite high energy. But there seems to be a bit more of a meeting of the two worlds now, which is great, because some of the information that you've given in some of the podcasts and some of your guests, I mean, talk to us a bit about your podcast, because it's fantastic. We're talking some amazing podcasts as well, which obviously excites me. Tell us about that.
Thank you. I think I need to frame it a little bit better, because I just sort of post it and pop it out there. But we've had people on it like Kenny Wilson, who's CEO of Doc Martens, and he's a friend. But I met him through working with him. He was the CEO of Cath Kidston before. But
was he?
Yeah, he was. But before that, he was at Levi's, and he spent most of his career there. Who else? Jono, a friend who's an Air Commodore in the Australian Air Force. And he got there basically because someone had written on the front of his file, unfortunately, a psychologist, not bright enough or stupid or something like that, that basically said he wasn't officer material. So he was absolutely hell-bent on doing it. But he's done 7 tours of duty and has PTSD, which he's really open about. And that's actually the most popular podcast, because people, even if they've not got something like PTSD, can really relate to what Jono's saying. It's really powerful, I think. And then I've had people like Giles. I mean, you can't beat Giles and Jim.
I know.
I mean, how amazing. I've had both of them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A lady called Tasha Urich, who's a psychologist in the States, New York Times bestseller. So all sorts of different people. And it's really just been talking to people. Oh, Dr. Rada, she's amazing too.
Brilliant.
Who I met through Giles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And just some interesting people and hearing about their story, basically. So what has got them to where they are? What have been the highs? What have been the lows? What have been the points that they want to share?
I think also where you've in your bite size as well, where you talk about things like imposter syndrome and being self-awareness and all these things, it's really cracking the nut open about topics that probably some people could think possibly that when you are in charge of a multi-billion pound company, or you're a really successful athlete, that you just don't suffer from any of these internal processes. And the reality is, I mean, obviously asking you today, that it's very much so apparent. And obviously with the pandemic now, I mean, there's even more things that are thrown on, and the bigger the organisation, the more levels to that in some cases. I mean, how's that your experience been of that with these? Do they need more work when you're working closely with them because of the pressures that come with those, extra things?
Yeah. So, I mean, the interesting thing you mentioned, the sport. So Lou, who I do the bite-sized with, is a sports psychologist, and she's worked with some amazing, she's worked with loads and loads of Olympic medalists. She really sees that side of stuff, which is great, because our discussion can be, like you said, a bit yin and yang, because we've got the same point but from different angles. But those people, it's been interesting because I've got people that I coach, and I've coached some of them for years actually, and it's not that they're not coping, but they've had to change so much. So initially it was all about communication. And whilst they might have been good communicators before the pandemic, suddenly they had to communicate, connect with people who are furloughed. How do you connect with them? How do you keep them engaged? How do you help them if they're not feeling good? And then there's also themselves. I mean, one person that I coach is one of the most emotionally resilient people I've ever come across. And not saying that they have no emotion, they do. But when we didn't have a coaching session for ages. And then when we did during the pandemic, they came off that and said, wow, I really needed that. I really needed to talk. I didn't realize how much I needed that. So I think, it's a pressure cooker for all of us.
Absolutely. And you actually, one of the, when you did have a chat with Giles, you mentioned about needing to get out and that kind of space that we all need, and actually the science behind it. And I think that's the thing, isn't there? There is, can you talk to us a bit about that? You will explain it far better. I am discovering more and more of this, but I'm still a bit nervous about saying it out loud. It's just the mechanics of the brain and the mind, and actually sort of sleep deprivation, how that can have such a cause and effect. Not getting out enough, not getting enough fresh air, not getting enough in tune with nature, all these things that we are now literally being crammed into our homes. I mean, I haven't been out for 3 days. That's not good. Probably I might be a bit more chilled out next time I speak to you.
Yeah, maybe it should be over a drink next time. So basically our brain hasn't evolved for 50,000 years. So we have the bit of the brain that everyone knows, reptilian brain, which is heart rate, breathing. Then we have the limbic system, which is the emotional centers of the brain. Now, this is very crude. Obviously, it's far more interconnected than this in reality. That, I think it was 120 million years ago, that's finished evolving. And then the next layer of the brain on top of that is the neocortex, and that's 50,000 years ago. But our limbic system, our emotional brain, is far quicker and more powerful than the bit around the outside, which is our rational brain. And so if we have something like, say, when we were allowed to go into coffee shops, if someone had you go off to the loo, you come back and someone's in your seat, that immediately creates a reaction. That makes us feel quite like anxious or angry. And that's literally because our primitive brain is saying, you're in my territory, danger.
Yeah.
But we know these things to an extent, but the thing is, these things add up all day, every day. And the only way to disperse the chemicals that add up is to be outside, is to do exercise, is to connect with other people. All these things that basically we need to think, well, how would we have lived thousands of years ago? And then try and incorporate that as much as we can. We certainly wouldn't have lived sort of talking to someone on a screen emitting light,
No, and but at the same time, I found it interesting how we are now connecting more with each other through technology. I prefer the way technology is being used now to possibly the this sort of sense of self that we present to other people through social media, which isn't necessary. We're all human. We all have, if I don't get enough sleep, I'm not great in the morning. We all can relate on a human level. And I think that there was that disconnect where people would sort of, how you appear on social media must be true. Well, you're not going to necessarily put all the bad bits out. You're possibly going to put all the best bits out. Whereas I feel like now we're having to deal day to day with, but again, that brings up different things, doesn't it? People have been talking about how they're doing work on Zoom all day long. They're becoming much more critique of themselves, how they look, how they feel. There's all these things. I mean, do you see any of those things coming up more now with your work going forwards? Obviously, you talked about coaching.
Well, yeah, the thing is for me, social media, you've got people who are brilliant like Giles and Rada, very positive. But if you take us normal human beings, what we tend to do is, of course, we only post a snapshot. So we're not seeing the nuance and complexity of what it means to be alive, which we would normally see. So when you're doing Zoom, although Zoom's got a lot of downfalls as well, you can see me in my lounge. You can, if I turned it around, you'd see my lounge is a complete mess. You can see when I'm not sort of looking posed or presentable to the camera. So it makes it more natural. And social media companies have a lot to answer for in terms of they do tap into our more primitive drivers and they use those and they manipulate them. Now, that might not have been their intention when they set out, but for them it works because they get more sales, they get more advertising, they get more income. And so it's not, I was really anti-social media. Lockdown has made me less anti because I've actually met some amazing people on it. But if we go back to research, if you're scrolling, it tends to have a more negative impact. If you're engaging and you're talking to someone, it can actually have a positive impact. It's as simple as that. Again, you look at it and you think, well, that makes sense, doesn't it?
I think it's education as well. I think that, we and I was talking to a colleague about this, that there needs to be more education on, we sort of say, we need to be more education on mental health, but we also need to be educated on how the mind works and how the brain works, because it is what you feed it is how you'll feel, and how you feel is how you act. And I think you mentioned on your podcast, and I've certainly said this before myself, it's not so much like I'm a pretty upbeat, positive person, but I have dark days, as we all do. And that could be lots of things. It could just be that I'm just, my coffee didn't taste right in the morning. But it's really hard if you've got a lot of stress coming in, not to, like you say, emotional resilience. That's tough at the moment for people. But if you understand that emotion is a state that you can change, and you practice that with different techniques, then it becomes like all other things like diet. And I know it's not that simple, but it takes work, doesn't it? I think.
It definitely takes work. And that's what the danger is people want the quick answers. So I won't name this person, but I did a talk somewhere quite prominent, and there was someone else talking who I was trying to connect with her beforehand. We were introduced and she just wouldn't connect with me. And I thought, fine. And then she presented that she had 3 quick, easy steps to fix anxiety. And the organizer came out and she looked so worried. And I didn't go into the actual talk, and she was sort of fretting. And I said, tell me what's wrong. And she said, I'll share with you, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh. And she said, I know there are people in there that the way it was presented, it's going to undo them. And I was like, okay, if we got all their email addresses, yes, okay, we can fix this, we can fix it.
That's great.
The thing is, there are people who maybe they mean well, but they'll say, oh, you just do this, this, and this, and you'll be okay. And then people aren't okay because it's not as easy as that. And then they can start feeling like they're failing, or they're treading,
Absolutely.
They're banging their head against a wall. So it's not saying, oh, this is so complex, you're never going to get it. But it is saying, like you say, it's using an analogy like exercise and saying, we have to keep fit. We have to keep mentally fit.
It's a muscle, isn't it? It's like you've got to flex the muscle. And, Giles and I were talking about just, using the muscle. He was talking about internal Google. He's using his internal Google more, which I think is brilliant. But actually it is that. It's just you have to treat it for what it is. And I think it's hard because the external world can have such an impression on your internal world, and it can feel very separate. And at the moment, people have been separated and then connected. It's a difficult time. You talked about talks there. I hear that there's a talk coming up this year. Is there a bit of a talk coming up with someone we might have heard at TEDx or something? I think a few people might have heard of TEDx talk.
Yeah, well,
tell us a bit about that.
I mentioned to you earlier, I hate being on video, so I've put off doing the talk whenever they come up. And I was due to do this one in March last year. And I actually did the rehearsal the week before, and then 2 days later, lockdown hit. So they've invited me back to do it in March this year. So London School of Economics.
There was obviously an intention there somewhere, because you're not getting off that lightly. It's following you. It's following you.
Me. No.
So you're going to be doing that in March. Tell us about that, because also your books. Obviously, tell us a bit about your books, because there was one you brought out during the pandemic, but you've had another one that's really interesting.
Yeah, the one in the pandemic sort of just gone, sat there somewhere, and occasionally people have said they've read it. I'm like, great. But the first one is called Defining You, and it was basically trying to get the profiling process into as much as you can into a book, to give people the tools to be able to explore their own story. And then that's in the first half of that. And the second half of that is more about coaching and optimizing who you are. And I've just rewritten the second edition to that, which focuses a lot on the emotional resilience. Because I've worked with not only leaders, but surgeons with emotional resilience. I've written a few papers. And where you're dealing with people like that, you're dealing with the knock-on effect to patient outcome. So it's not just that individual, it's does that person that they're operating on live or not. So there's that piece, that book, and then the other book is Mirror Thinking, and that's the one that came out in the pandemic. But that's the one that I'm really passionate about. The first one, I'm just doing a pilot actually based on the first one with a group of really interesting people from across the world. So that's sort of trying to bring it to the pandemic world.
Yeah,
absolutely. The second one sort of reflects what you were just saying, apart from the fact it's called Mirror Thinking.
Which I love. I think that sounds, I'm really interested to hear about that. I mean, I haven't read it yet, but I will.
Well, it's really about looking at the impression that people around us make on us all the time. Like you were saying, it's our external world and how that impacts our internal world, because what happens externally is then fed into what's happening internally. And my key aim with it is to try and help people in underprivileged backgrounds to try and get out of those backgrounds, because in effect it's using natural mechanisms to enable escape from loops of deprivation or abuse or gang membership. But it's also something that people in the most privileged settings can use to help them live a better life. And
you've done some work with the NHS. I'm rubbish with pronouncing words. Acronym, is that how you say it? With the COVID, you did a podcast with NHS, and there was something you did, C for Connection. Tell us a bit more about that. What you worked with that? You did something in your podcast, wasn't it? Around
remember that? It now. It's basically.
I'm sure you could do one off the cuff right now if you wanted to, Fiona.
It's look at mental health 5 a day, which the NHS came up with, which I think is brilliant, but they don't seem to promote or talk about. And I just changed it into the acronym COVID, but. The mental health 5 a day, the things that we hear a lot about. So getting outside, being active, meditation or mindfulness, connecting with others and giving back to others. And
that's nice.
There's also an amazing man I met. He's the lead editor for the UN Happiness Report, and he was a professor of economics. And I don't know if you've heard of Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Yes, I have.
So he's Nobel Peace Prize winner. And I'm talking to this other guy and I mentioned Daniel Kahneman. He's like, or Kahneman, I can never say it right. He's like, oh, Danny. And I'm like, what?
So I love that. Giles does that.
Yeah, Giles does.
No, he doesn't. But he could.
It's amazing. So basically, long story short, I spent hours with this man in the end in Canada, and he's done a lot of research that shows how being pro-social doesn't just help our well-being immensely, but it helps the economy. And so it's got something that I feel like government should be more convinced by. Yes. Well, I mean, Jacinda Ardern takes this stuff very seriously anyway, but we're not in New Zealand, are we? Unfortunately. But let's not get onto politics. Politics.
Yeah, I'll start to feel a bit nervous when we go near politics at the moment. But I read something interesting the other day that was about bosses becoming more like coaches, like the whole. I mean, thank goodness those tyrant bosses back from the 80s, and I definitely had a few of them that were like, boiler room-esque kind of, do it or get out, that kind of mentality. No one that I know now, obviously, but literally that there was an article all about how bosses now, especially with what's happened, are going to have to be coaching their staff more than they are. They're going to have to become that kind of nurturing, and I think that gives a lot of hope for the whole nation, that maybe there's going to be a bit of a shift. And with this work that you're talking about and doing, I think it's really important. Talk about more of the work that you're saying where you want to work with more of the underprivileged and, maybe smaller businesses, not just, obviously you've done the big, we've all done the big, everyone loves the big shiny stuff, but it's relevant to everything, isn't it? Yeah. So it'd be lovely to hear a bit more about that.
So my readers or people have asked me, since I brought out the first book, if I would create a digital course. And I sort of kept thinking, maybe one day. And then the pandemic hit and I thought, right, I think it is time. And so that's one way in which I'll be able to offer tools. So initially I was going to do it B2B, so business to business. But then I've got all these readers. So I've got people on this pilot course that literally started today. I've got people from India, America, UK, obviously, Holland, Germany, Australia. And it's a real mix. So I've got 2 people in the US who are doctors, medical doctors. I've got someone in the US who's an entrepreneur. I've got readers from Australia, from Holland, so all these different people. And I thought, actually, I don't want to just offer this B2B. I want to offer it B2C. If people can stand hearing my voice, it gives them the chance to sort of walk through this course. And it just gives people more tools to say, who am I? And in a way that's safe and that's constructive, because you can very easily go down the wrong path with that stuff. And then I'm creating one based on the second half of the book, which is more around, it's going to be called Optimizing You, but emotional resilience. And then the thing I'm most excited about is this mirror thinking, because this charity, the chief exec read my book, and then we had a meeting. I didn't even know she'd read it. And she's like, I've started quoting bits from it. I was like, oh, and she said, can we do something with this? I was like, yes, definitely. And so we're looking at creating a course for 14 to 18-year-olds to help them understand what they need to do to be mentored. It sounds obvious, but it's not, because of all the barriers we have in the modern world. What they need to look for, how they need to be, and then, of course, for their 18 to 25-year-olds who then mentor them on how to be a great mentor or role model and what that means. And
that's amazing.
I mean, the thing is, there are loads of it's always good with intention, these mentoring programs, but a lot of them fail because they don't understand the barriers. And it means that actually there's research that shows that kids that are taken and mentored and then dropped, it has a more negative impact on all their outcomes, including life outcomes, but how much they're involved in crime. But I don't want it just to be for the underprivileged. I want any kids to be able to have this stuff, because it's basically talking a bit about your mind, your emotional makeup, but in a way that's easy and friendly and fun.
I think that's really inspirational and incredibly empowering. And I think, as I mentioned to you sort of before we came on here, I've been looking into something similar, because it's just for young adults. I mean, let alone in this, in our community, we've sadly had, suicides, and there's been really unfortunate mental health issues with, that's come up, but they've always been there as well. And I think if you can teach these tools to young adults and try and get in a bit sooner, and like you say, if you're teaching the young adults, but you're also teaching the mentors, I mean, that's phenomenal, because that's, you're coming at it from both angles, and then you're going to get the maximum results. Because ultimately, if you can empower people to power themselves, we'd all be a lot happier if we had access to this. You still got to work at it. You still got to do it every day. You still got to go to bed early, and you still got to, eat well and all the rest of it. But just having those tools, and like you say, a lot of people's lives just don't facilitate them to have access to tools, do they? So I think the underprivileged, like you say, make it as accessible as possible, but equally, that's really, inspirational that you're doing that, and that's come from your book. I think that's fantastic.
I mean, the thing that I like is it's a natural mechanism. If you can remove the barriers, then you can just let it happen, and it works, and it helps people fulfill their life outcomes much, much more positively. But you have to remove those barriers, and you have to just equip them with skills that, or understanding that while it's natural, we don't learn. So at school, in our curriculum, it's all about, we put test results first, we put maths, we put English first. And that puts pressure on teachers as well, because teachers then don't have the freedom to really connect with children and understand them as much as they probably want to. So that's the other thing. I mean, I want to do it. I want to get it so that it goes to parents ultimately. Initially, we're just doing it with that group, with teachers. And then I've got passion for the NHS. So my aim with the first course, the one based on my first book, is to, because that very much builds emotional resilience, to put it out and then use some of the money for people paying for it to fund people in the NHS to go through it for, I don't know, £5 or free or whatever.
Brilliant. If you got, I mean, say you're a local business owner, small size business, and you've gone through this pandemic, as we have. Say it was me. So I'm just starting out, and I haven't necessarily got the resources at the moment to invest in a phenomenal coach like yourself, Fiona, which would be fantastic. But say I want to just, what would be, where would you say would be a good resource to go to that would just be easy to find out a bit more useful information, helpful to a business owner? Put you on the spot there.
Put me on the spot. It's really tricky. I think it has to be self-led, unfortunately, if you're...
Yeah.
And then I think it's looking at things like TED Talks. It's looking at people's work, like Tasha Urich, who very much explores self-awareness, what that means and how that can help. And then literally going through references based on those things and thinking... reading stuff that works for you. It's not about if you don't like reading, then don't start reading, find something online that's a video or whatever, but find these resources who are people who actually immerse themselves in that as a career, so they really know the science behind it, because
I've heard podcast, quite good podcast. But again, it's the power of podcasts is amazing, because at the moment you can literally listen, even through Alexa, as we were discussing earlier, if you want to, your favourite podcast as you're going around doing what you're doing. So there's quite a lot of great ways to digest information out there, isn't there?
There is. Definitely.
What would you say have been your highlights in your life? What would you say have you got a kind of high? And people always sort of ask me, what's your high? What's your low? Would you say there's any that stand out that might inspire other people to see how you've achieved a lot, I would say?
My highlights are snowboarding.
Amazing, brilliant.
That's my real passion, and just going out and hang out with groups of girls who like doing the sort of snowboarding I do. So going backcountry and hiking and doing all that stuff. Oh. And there aren't an abundance of girls who like doing that. So it's kind of, and then I love being outdoors and just being active. I know it sounds really cheesy, but at the moment I feel really good, because I feel finally the stuff that I wanted to study when I was a teenager is going to potentially have a bigger impact and help more people. Sounds really cheesy, but it makes me feel really excited.
Sound cheesy.
And then the lows, I guess, was when my dad passed away. At the same time, I had 3 miscarriages between my first daughter and my second, and losing dad, I think, was probably worse than, I don't know, I never really thought, but probably worse than the miscarriages. But
was it all quite close together? The timing was
it was all close together. But I think I say that out loud because I think it's important to make miscarriage something that's talked about rather.
Very much so. Very much so.
And I had really difficult pregnancies. Neither of my pregnancies were easy. I was incredibly ill with extreme sickness, morning sickness throughout both, and a whole load of other things. But I love my family, and I love where I'm at now, except for getting older, which I'm trying really hard.
You don't look old. You do not look old.
It's good because I've got probably a slightly smudged Zoom.
You look very young on my screen there.
Let's keep it that way. Maybe we should never meet in person. And we should.
What, do I just get to go out with this screen for a drink?
I'll take this with me.
It could go that way, couldn't it? But I think, like you say, highlighting things like miscarriage. I suffered a miscarriage before I had my son.
Miscarriage.
Oh, and it's people do not talk about miscarriages. I didn't even know what it was. I just went to went to have the scan, and they were like, "Oh no, not there anymore." And it was just, and also it's. Yeah, it's kind of it's such a taboo. It shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be. It needs to be something. I really embrace women like yourself that are talking more openly about it, because it absolutely needs to be talked about. And I think, and my father passed away 3 years ago, 3 years ago. I'm sorry for you, but it was again father, best friend, dog, all within. It was literally, but these things happen a lot, and they sometimes. I feel like, and I don't know, you might have better experience with this than me, but it seems to create a breakthrough. It's like you suddenly come through, all these things come up, and then it's certainly broken a lot open for me. I think there's been more, not only just because I'm in my mid-40s, and I call it not a midlife crisis, but a midlife awakening. I think... But there is, isn't it? You're halfway through your life. You've had life experience. You've been lucky enough to be on the planet, and you're able to sort of look back and reflect. But also you feel things very deeply. It's And yeah, it's an interesting time because I certainly feel like I've been undone and trying to do myself back up in a slightly better way, emotional resilience being one of them, or just having a bit more control over my own emotions a bit rather than them controlling me. And I think in business that's helpful as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really helpful. And it's the ultimate skill really, is having, I call it emotional wisdom rather than emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence goes against what I believe in, which is this fixed, you're born with it or you're not. Emotional wisdom actually fits with the science as well, because you can grow your emotional wisdom. And I think it's a nice way of looking at it, because I think of wise old women or men like Miss Marple, who've just got this view on the world, and they're calm and they're maybe a bit quirky and funny. And then you've also got, on the other hand, the grumpy old woman or the grumpy old man. And I think I aspire to be like that wise old woman, or wise old, not a wise old man because I'm a woman, but that wise old woman. And we can all do that. But it takes.
Was your dad a bit of a mentor to you? Did you get some of that wisdom from your? I'm sorry he's gone, but it comes from somewhere, doesn't it? I'm sort of able to. I don't know, when did you lose your dad? Because I'm able to look back a bit now and sort of smile a bit again now, which is pleasant when you get to that part of grieving.
Yeah. It was 7 years ago, but it's painful, isn't it, when you lose your dad or your mum? And yes, he was a kind, gentle soul. He wasn't all his life. He had a heart attack. I'm not saying he wasn't kind and gentle, but it came out when he had a heart attack, and it really changed who he was, or what the part of him he presented to the world. And he was just this kind person that loved everyone, and just everyone was wonderful. And he lived in York, and anyone he met, any of my friends, he'd be like, "Come and stay, you're welcome." And so I love one thing with if you have anyone, whether it's a parent or someone outside. So my mirror thinking is role models, and that person is someone who believes in you, and he believed in me. And so even though he's gone,
that's amazing.
My stepmom will send me little messages sometimes and go, "Oh, your dad would have been so proud of you doing this." And I'm like,
I was going to say, I think your dad would be extremely proud of
yours
everything
too. But I think it's that you can carry that on even after they've gone. It's that remembering what they would be thinking.
Yeah. And I think sort of generations of generations, and then we're changing patterns and we're doing this and we're doing that. It's kind of like that, when you look back from where you've come through that generation process. I think it's fascinating. I sort of, I had a mixed experience with my dad, because he was not the most he was not the most pleasant man when I was younger, but as I got older, he was very gentle and very, and I sort of became his carer, and as it often is the case, isn't it? So, but just trying to extract the wisdom and the warmth that you got from them is really nourishing actually when they go. So, but all these things, everyone's having to deal with so much of these different feelings at the moment. And I really would say to people listening to, listen to your podcast and read your books, because the dot to dot as well, the ones that I've listened to are really easy to, as talking to you now, really easy to listen to and just to digest. And for me personally, it's made so much sense. I always thought I was quite sort of integrated on my understanding of psychology, and I'm not at all. And I just find it fascinating. I think the more understanding you have, the more equipped you are to look after yourself, which no one can really look after you for you, much as I'd love someone just to scoop me up and take care of me. It's just not going to work out that way.
Yeah, I'd quite like that too. And I also,
the old Prince Charming on the horse and all that stuff. But no, I mean, I'm not that bad. But it's true, isn't it? You've got to look after yourself before you can look after anyone else.
Yeah. And it's interesting. The thing you said there about psychology is the more you know, the more you know you don't know, if that makes sense. But that's
self-awareness hell.
Sorry, what's that?
Self-awareness hell.
No. Actually, there is a thing around that. It's saying that the research says that people that are really unself-aware, when they find out, they go back to being really unself-aware because they can't face.
Really?
Yeah. But they literally just shut down. But
God.
No, I don't think it is hell, though. I mean, I'm certainly way from the polished article. And, I will say to my coachees, now, I don't do this, but because they know me well enough to know all my flaws, but I'm there to guide and advise them. So it's a bit like having a coach who might not be the best tennis player in the world, but they're coaching the best tennis player in the world.
Absolutely.
They're advising them, they're helping them, they're guiding them. And I know the things, I just don't always do them myself.
But I think that's, again, isn't it? It's like if we could do everything, then, well, there wouldn't be much to do, would there? I mean, certainly when you'd be so bored, you'd just be sitting there feeling so brilliant about yourself. There'd be nothing to do. But even when I was a yoga teacher, people would come in and go, I can't touch my toes. And I'd be like, well, wouldn't that make for a boring lesson if you could touch your toes the minute you walked in the door? We'd have nowhere to mark the start and nowhere to mark the middle and nowhere to look at the end.
Analogy, I like
isn't
that.
it?
And I also,
because it's true. Sorry.
I'm surprised I haven't interrupted you already. I'm usually very good at that. Apologies. It's also, I think, we're not set up at school to believe that learning is this interesting, fascinating, enjoyable, exciting thing. We're sort of set up to learn. You need to know these to pass that test, and da da da. And I'm not saying we all go on to study chemistry and physics and become some astrophysicist or something, but we all are on a journey to learning more about ourselves, and that's a fun journey. It's interesting. Curiosity is fun, and it's so good for you. That, again, the research shows that the impact it has on well-being are immense.
I think that's it. And also, like you say,
it needs to be framed differently for everyone, including adults. It's about curiosity.
I totally agree with you, and I think, again, it's those, it's the people that you surround and let into your world, and it's the information that you digest, and the thoughts that we all have, that internal voice that talks to us, and just being aware that it is a voice. It's not actually, well, it is a part of you, but I mean, that could be a whole different podcast we could talk about there, but it's just having a little bit more, and just be nice to you. You did touch on the way that you talk to yourself, and you said something actually that I've said myself to people, where imagine that you're talking to somebody. Would you talk to them the way you talk to yourself? Because we can be really hard on ourselves, can't we? And I think currently, with everything that's going on, myself included, with business, it's really tough, and it's really hard to be, I haven't done this and I haven't done that, and and wow, where does that go? It's not going to end well. So I think I'm really excited to read your books. I think I'd quite like you to profile me, please. So I think we might have to do some work on that, and then maybe we can talk again. And I'd love to hear more about the charity work that you're doing and the work with the NHS, because I think that's really fantastic, and I can see it really lights you up, which is brilliant. So lucky world, getting you, getting busy on them. So thank you so much for coming to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me on. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Oh, it's been great. And if people want to listen to more of your wisdom, we will call it Fiona Wisdom, then they can listen to Dot, and they can access that on all the normal podcast channels. And then obviously, if they want to find out more about you as well, there's those books that you had out, which really fantastic. And good luck with the TEDx talk. We'll make sure we do a bit of a blast out for that when we do that.
Thank you. Maybe not.
Sure,
maybe wait until see how it goes.
Listen, you've been brilliant on this. If you can sit opposite me like this in the kind of AI format.
It's very
you're there.
It's interacting rather than talking at. Someone said you've got to think of this as a performance. And I was like, okay.
Sometimes when people say things like that to me, I'm like, I kind of wish you hadn't said that. That's like
one of my normal talks that I give. I'll be much happier with that.
It's like if people ever say the word test to me.
Oh,
it's like,
it's not nice.
Please don't say test. We've got a test. No. I'm like back at school now, and it's just it's all sorts of things, isn't it? But I'm sure you'll be great, and we'll all be excited to hear more of what you've got to say. So thank you so much for sharing this morning with us, and I can't wait for us to chat again soon in person.
Hopefully we might not have to leave it that long, because you never know when that'll be.
You never know. Now we know where each other lives. We're not far from each other. We'll probably bump into each other on a hike or something like that. So, but thank you so much, Fiona. It's lovely to meet you. All right. Take care.
Take care.